No, stop. Think of the children.
Think of the children. Won't somebody please think of the children?
Children, children, future, future. Are you ready for the children? Whoa, whoa, whoa. The future is a-coming, hey, hey, hey. Children, children, future, future.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
What kind of an example are we setting?
For your children.
Children, children, children are the future. Kids!
For your children. For your children. For your
What kind of an
children.
example are we setting?
大家好. Hello everyone. Welcome to Think of the Children. Is this the future we promise for? My name is Azabilbul. I'm a global market specialist who have been working in this area over a decade. Today, we are going to have a deep look into the world's upcoming, or rather, up-and-come global power, namely China, which has ramifications for all citizens of the world. None of us should look away from. It is now part of the history that China became the world's largest economy on purchasing power parity basis 5 years ago in 2014. The key question to ask is what kind of political and economic system China stands for and what does it mean for us? China, officially called the People's Republic of China, is a country in East Asia and the world's most populous country, as we all know, with a population of around 1.4 billion. The country is led by the Communist Party of China, which quite ironically practice a form of free market economy. Now, let's have a look together at people's life in China.
首先，你要设置一个 VPN， 就是虚拟私人网络，把所有你发送的和接收的都加密了。你信用卡呢？最好就是连接到亚洲的地址，但是每天屏蔽的地方不同，所以连接到美国西海岸会简单点。要记得啊，他们能识别出普通 SSL 加密和 VPN 加密。还有一点就是不要用中国的 DNS 服务器，我们用 Cryptoware。成了。
谢谢。
你想看什么啊？哎，我知道了。
我很感谢。这样吧，待会儿我自己看一下。
Looks like having the free market economy, Chinese people's lifestyle isn't actually that much free after all. Well, particularly considering the fact that one needs VPN to access YouTube to watch a funny cat video. So why is that? Let's take a deep look together.
There is a lot of debate in the West about the free flow of information on the internet. But in China, there is no debate. The government maintains tight control on what people inside the country can and can't see, making the World Wide Web not so wide. China runs the world's most complicated censorship machine. Many have joked that the Chinese internet is more like an intranet. It's a complex internet filtering system that China uses to block foreign websites. Try accessing Facebook or Twitter from inside China and you get this message. Even publications like the New York Times are blocked. China also censors the internet by passing laws and rules that flat out ban certain content that the government deems illegal or inappropriate. Prominent taboos include the 3 T's: Taiwan, Tibet, and Tiananmen. For example, if you search for Tiananmen Square from your computer here in Hong Kong, articles about the incident in 1989 come up in the results. But in China, these filtered results make no mention of it. China has come up with homemade alternatives for the popular social media platforms it has blocked, but these too are tightly controlled. The government actually requires Chinese internet companies to employ armies of human censors to police user-generated content on their platforms. We recently visited one company that has 1,200 people doing the job. One employee said it's like being a sanitation worker for cyberspace. If you were hoping to be anonymous on the web in China, forget about it. Chat apps, discussion forums, and video games all require you to enter your real name and also provide your national ID number and phone number for registration. China also requires internet companies to store user data on local servers and to allow authorities to inspect them when they deem necessary. So while many in the West are up in arms about privacy and freedom of speech online, in China, users know that Big Brother is watching closely and has been doing so for a long time.
China made it clear that it doesn't want to copy the political system of the Western liberal democracies. Rather, they believe that they are cultivating a democratic political system, which they called People's Democratic Dictatorship themselves. But how did they do that? For example, by turning the internet, which has become part of the day-to-day life of the rest of the world, into a managed intranet for the Chinese people. Chinese leaders make it clear that the kind of democracy they are after is a socialist democracy. They describe it as a system in which power is concentrated in a central authority, namely the Chinese Communist Party, which in turn acts in the supposed best interest of the people. The Chinese Communist Party believes that it represents the will of the people perfectly. In this way, the party understands its role to be a representative of the people as a whole. Are you feeling a bit lost and unsure how this kind of idea works? Here we go.
Since the end of Mao Zedong's leadership in the 1970s, the People's Republic of China has become one of the biggest economies in the world. Although they still call themselves communist, the inner workings of the Chinese government are a mystery to many. So how does China's government actually work? Well, China has operated under a single political party since the birth of Communist China, called the Communist Party of China. Although 8 other minor parties exist, they are not allowed to challenge CPC policy. This situation paints China as an authoritarian country where political dissent is punishable by lengthy prison terms or exile. China is also one of 5 major nations in the world to retain a communist ideology. And while most businesses are owned by the state, China has been implementing capitalist policies and allowing companies to privatize. In reality, China is more of a mixed economy than a purely communist country. Additionally, many government officials are elected for their technical expertise, making China in some ways a technocracy. This series of political compromises explain why China is economically much more successful than other communist countries of the past. With just one political party, there is more cohesive legislation allowing China's government to react quickly to market trends. Their communist ideology also lends itself to long-term economic policy, which has allowed them to prosper at the expense of regulation and workers' rights. China's government is infamous for corruption, ranging from racketeering to bribery. In 2015, a former security chief was sentenced to life in prison for bribery and abuse of power. Also, punishments for threatening the party's dominance are so severe that China is ranked among the lowest nations for press freedoms and human rights. In the end, China's government has been successful on paper, but not so much in theory or ethical policy. As an authoritarian government, China sees mass censorship of unapproved ideologies and is one of the largest jailers of journalists in the world. It's clear that being the second largest economy in the world while juggling strict ideologies comes at a difficult price. China's government is actually not too different from the socialist government of North Korea, China's next-door neighbor.
So really, how did socialist democracy, which got ranked amongst the lowest for press freedoms and human rights, become the world's largest economy? Here is a quick glimpse at the secret behind the Chinese miracle. What is exactly going on with China? Do they really do so well with the economy? Or are they cooking certain parts of the success story? Prior to the economic reforms and trade liberalization, which started nearly 40 years ago, China implemented strict communist and Maoist policies that made the economy poor, stagnant, centrally controlled, vastly inefficient, and fully isolated from the global economy. Since China's opening up to foreign investment and international trade and implementing free market reforms in 1979, China has been among the world's fastest growing economies, with real annual gross domestic product growth averaging 9.5% until 2017, a pace described by the World Bank as the fastest sustained expansion by a major economy in the history of humankind. Such growth has enabled China, on average, to double its GDP every 8 years and helped raise 800 million people out of poverty. But economists are worried that the rapid growth of household debt will create vulnerability in the financial system at large. Also, China's economic figures have always had credibility issues due to the suspicion that the country is cooking some of its books. For example, Financial Times reported that China's economy is about 12% smaller than the official figures indicate, and its real growth has been overstated by about 2%. But there is no denying that we are looking still at an economic and political giant on a global scale. Here is an example.
They love to shop. They love to shop. They love to shop.
Are we all set?
I think so. Got my clicker, so.
I wanted to tell you what a pleasure it's been working with you over the last months.
Oh, thanks, Zhao. You too.
The collaborations we have felt very pestered. Too much noise.
Hey. Sorry, what kind of...
Oh, you know. Human rights, democracy, blah, blah, blah. Everyone wants to tell you what's wrong with China. No one wants to hold the mirror up to themselves. I wanted to commend you.
Thanks. Okay, so we are late to the party. The road to the Chinese market is already well trodden, and it is littered with the companies who have failed. Uber, Mattel, eBay, Best Buy. These are not mom-and-pop operations. But they made the mistake of thinking that China was looking over the fence, wanting to be America, when nothing could be further from the truth. Okay, so I am going to show you a portfolio of 7 customer segments, and they are united by one thing. They love to shop. We only have to look at this picture to know that. What's this an image of? Protest. But more than that, this is the moment when China exchanged the dream of democracy for an economic miracle. And by the way, can I point out, the tank man has been shopping. The most iconic image to come out of China, and at its heart is a man who has just been to the store. To buy what? Rice, a newspaper, dried duck tongue. Okay, let's look at the segments. The first I am calling the rural dreamer in their 30s, late teens to mid-20s. They have a high brand awareness, minimal free time, lots of their money is sent home, a high brand awareness. JD, excuse us for one moment. Okay, yes. She's just gone to, Actually, while we're waiting, let's talk about the Luddite shopper, seeing as we're the Luddite shopper. The Luddite shopper is, I'm sorry, just, Well, for a start, it takes me 5 years to build an accurate segmentation, and you have me on a 6-month contract, and China is moving faster than we can collect the data. I mean, this is a nation that's gone from famine to slim fast in 1 generation, which is, amazing, but also it's not a safe speed to be moving at, because we're going to be selling into a market where we can't see the data, where None of our customer information is protected from the state, and every single purchase made on one of our cards will be recorded by the government, which, I'm sorry, but I do find that scary, because basically you're going to be getting into bed with someone that you don't understand, which, it just seems a bit lunatic, because, this is the future. It's the next 100 years, and we don't understand, and I think that might be a problem. Right?
Taiwan. China's economic success story cannot be understood without weaving it in the global economic and political context. During Cold War, under Nixon's presidency, Henry Kissinger, the famous neo-realist and the master of international games of balance of power, pioneered a policy of détente with Soviets and a rapprochement with China, a movement which will serve as a catalyst to reintegrate China into the global political and economic stage, which symbolically culminated in accepting People's Republic of China's permanency in the United Nations Security Council, replacing Taiwan. Oh, are you feeling confused? What is the relationship with Taiwan here, and why would China want to replace Taiwan in the United Nations? Let's understand the background together.
Are there two Chinas? Well, there's two governments, both with China in their names. There's this one, the People's Republic of China, which sits here. Then there's the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, over here. These small islands that make up Taiwan are home to 23 million people and sit just southeast of mainland China. Since 1949, they have had an independent government, which was once a one-party military dictatorship and has since become a multi-party democratic government. Then back to the mainland, where 1.3 billion people are governed by the Communist Party of China. So which one is the real China? And where does Taiwan fit into all of this? To understand what's going on, we need to go back to 1912, to the fall of the Qing dynasty and the end of 2,000 years of imperial rule. That's when the Republic of China, or ROC, was founded. It looked like this. Over the next 15 years, armed rebellions spread across the country, leading to the birth and growth of the Communist Party of China. After the mass killing of communists in 1927, they fought back against the ruling nationalist government, and the Chinese Civil War officially began. After World War II ended in 1945, the Chinese Communist Party succeeded in overthrowing the Nanjing-based ROC nationalist government in 1949, who then fled to Taiwan and made Taipei its new capital. The People's Republic of China, PRC, established its capital in Beijing, and the ROC lost its UN seat to the PRC in 1971. The PRC officially holds the title of China, but many countries still have unofficial ties with the ROC. For instance, the US Congress set up the Taiwan Relations Act, allowing the US to continue some foreign missions there, such as the sale of more than $25 billion in arms to the island since 2007. So there's one government in Taipei and another in Beijing, and the two governments are at odds over the status of the island. For the PRC, there is one China, and Taiwan is a part of it. In 1992, both governments kind of agreed to this, but they differ on who is the legitimate government of that China. So what do the people of Taiwan think about this? The majority of the population, although ethnically Han, by and large consider themselves to be Taiwanese and not Chinese. And although independence was tacitly restricted by the 1992 agreement, some of the newer political leaders have expressed their desire of sovereignty.
在这里，我要重申，台湾绝不会接受一国两制，绝大多数台湾民意也坚决反对一国两制，而这也是台湾共识。
But Beijing is not budging. Instead, it has reiterated its desire for what it calls peaceful national reunification, and threatened that if Taiwan goes for independence, then the peaceful part of the unification could go out the window.
我们愿意为和平统一创造广阔空间，但绝不为各种形式的台独分裂活动留下任何空间。
But could the mainland use military force to accomplish this reunification? Experts say the chances are low. Firstly, there's the 160-kilometer wide Taiwan Strait to cross. Ferrying troops would be a slow-moving and difficult operation. The surviving forces would still have to trudge through the beach with their equipment under heavy fire from the 180,000 active duty Taiwanese soldiers, plus some or all of Taiwan's 1.5 million reservists. Instead of military power, China is trying to use political and economic means to bring the island back under its control. China is the island's largest trading partner. It's been good for business on both sides of the strait, but it does give the mainland leverage. So are the two sides ready to take on one another?
And here is some few more details we shall look into about what is the major difference between the two countries.
Two countries, both called China. Taiwan and China are not the same, in more ways than you might realize. Hi, welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. This is China. But it's complicated since there are two governments that claim to represent the legitimate China. After the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911, China was known as the Republic of China, led by the KMT. Until 1949, when the KMT lost a civil war against the communists. Then they fled to the island province of Taiwan, where they set up the new government of the Republic of China. Today, Taiwan is still officially the Republic of China, and the rest of China is the People's Republic of China, which is still communist, which you can tell because Mao Zedong's portrait is still in Tiananmen Square. So is his embalmed corpse. But a lot has changed since the Civil War ended 7 decades ago. Taiwan, and what's now called mainland China, have become very different. Here are 5 major differences. Number 5. Chinese writing. In George Orwell's classic 1984, the totalitarian party creates Newspeak, a modified form of English created to control how people think. It was double plus good. In mainland China, the Communist Party dramatically changed the traditional written language that had been used throughout much of Chinese history. They replaced it with simplified Chinese characters. So for instance, this is the traditional Chinese character for love. This radical here means heart. The communists did this and left us with a simplified character for love. It was truly heartless. The idea of modifying Chinese characters didn't start with the Chinese Communist Party, but Mao Zedong originally wanted to take it to an extreme, completely getting rid of Chinese characters and replacing them with an alphabet of Roman letters, like the ones we use for English. Here's an example of one possible Romanization system that the communists looked into using as a replacement. But it didn't get that far, and we have one person to thank for that: Stalin. That's not a joke. Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union suggested to Mao that the Chinese people should have their own national written language, and Mao changed his mind. Although during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, Mao did try to further simplify Chinese characters again, but it didn't work. So nowadays, mainland China uses simplified Chinese, but it's not so simplified that it makes it completely impossible to read traditional characters, just much harder. On the surface, simplifying Chinese characters was to encourage literacy, but getting rid of traditional characters also disconnected people from their history and culture. If the majority of citizens can only read simplified characters, then they can only read books the Communist Party allows to be published. But in Taiwan, they've used traditional Chinese characters all along, which means in Taiwan, people can more easily read ancient Chinese texts. Not that they do, since why bother when Taiwan has Netflix now? But like I said, the Communist Party claimed they enforced simplified Chinese to improve literacy rates. I mean, those traditional characters are so complicated. Well, as of 2015, in mainland China, only 3.6% of adults can't read and write. In Taiwan, though, that number is only 1.6%, less than half. Now, there's probably a lot of reasons for that, but it also shows you don't have to sacrifice your country's cultural heritage for people to be able to read and write. Number 4, different visas. If you want to visit most places in mainland China, you need to visit your local PRC embassy or consulate and apply for a travel visa. And just to get a normal 30 or 60-day travel visa, you have to submit a lot of information, like your current employment, which hotels you're going to stay at, your criminal record, and whether you visited certain Muslim countries. But even if you get that travel visa, you still won't be able to just go anywhere in China. For example, Tibet. These days, Tibet is harder to get into than North Korea. I wonder if there's something there the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want foreigners to see. Or maybe they just don't want foreigners to get sick. From the altitude, I mean. And even if you get into China, there's always a risk that you just might never want to leave. China has recently created a simplified visa program where visitors from certain countries can visit a handful of major cities, but it's only good for 3 days and you can't travel outside those places. Now, to visit Taiwan, people from a lot of countries, including the US, can just show up at the airport and get a visa waiver to stay 90 days. And don't worry, you can visit pretty much anywhere in Taiwan. Maybe they don't have so many things to cover up. Number 3, temples. The thing that struck me about Taiwan is just how many temples there are. You see them everywhere, and you can just walk right in without paying some entrance fee. And people inside are still engaged in the kind of ritual worship they've been doing for hundreds of years. Now, this is not so much the case in mainland China. Sure, China used to have tons of temples everywhere, but then Mao Zedong launched the Cultural Revolution specifically to destroy what he called the Four Olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. That included old temples. It's hard to know exactly how much was destroyed during those 10 years, but it was a lot. Of course, recently a number of Chinese temples have been restored, but they're meant to be tourist sites where, in the great tradition of the Buddha, they're being used to make money for communist officials. Like the Jokhang Temple in Tibet. The entrance fee is about $12. Pay another $12 and they'll let you take photos. And let's just say, a lot of ancient artifacts you see in museums in China today might not be too authentic. The fact that a lot of those artifacts had simplified Chinese writings should have been a clue. Number 2, constitutional freedoms. Now, you know, at first I thought this would be something China and Taiwan have in common. I mean, after all, the Chinese Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, the press, assembly, association, etc., etc. And Taiwan's Constitution guarantees pretty much the same things. Except there's a reason why protests in Taiwan look like this, and protests in China look like this. It's almost like having a constitution doesn't actually guarantee rule of law. And finally, number 1, genocide. The government of Taiwan may have been a bit authoritarian in the past, but now it has a strict no genocide policy. So when it comes to genocide, the Chinese Communist Party really is so much better at it. The Communist Party has killed off tons of groups during its 70 years in power. Intellectuals, democracy advocates, Tibetans. But let's look at one of the biggest groups being genocided right now, Falun Gong, a spiritual practice widely popular in China. In the 90s, the Chinese government celebrated Falun Gong in state-run newspapers, and even invited its founder to give a lecture at the Public Security Bureau. But eventually, the communist leader decided, you know what? There are too many people practicing. Let's round them up and kill them. No, not just kill. Kill them and take their organs so we can make a profit. I mean, what's the point of genocide unless you can profit from it, right? But in Taiwan, which shares the same language and cultural heritage, but with democracy, instead of a one-party authoritarian state, Falun Gong is practiced everywhere. And what's the point of freedom if you can't also protest genocide somewhere else?
This event, now recorded in the history books, demonstrates a greatest example of how the majority of United Nations are willing to betray democracy in order to maximize their self-interest. So if China has already got everything they wanted, why would they still worry or be bothered about Taiwan, such a small, tiny island located in the Pacific Ocean at the corner of East Asia? Here's the reason.
To China, it's an inalienable part of its territory. But for many in Taiwan, there's a growing sense of national identity. Compared to China, Taiwan is tiny. It's not even 1,000th of China's landmass, and its population isn't even 2% of the mainland's. But while the self-governing island only has 17 countries that officially recognise it, its quasi-nation status provokes intense angst within China's ruling Communist Party. The uneasy peace that has prevailed since Taiwan split from mainland China in the wake of the country's civil war in 1949 appears to be on precarious ground. Beijing has been ramping up a relentless campaign to try and persuade countries and businesses alike to accept Taiwan is a part of China. And earlier this year, Qantas was one of many airlines who bowed to Chinese pressure to label Taiwan a territory and not a country. So why is China so sensitive about this tiny little island? Taiwan's armed forces pales in comparison to Beijing's military might. And Taiwan's highly developed economy is still a mismatch against the world's second biggest. So the global superpower should have nothing to fear, right? Well, not so fast. Experts say the reason Taiwan produces such intense anxiety amongst China's ruling elite is because it represents a vision of what the mainland could be, a thriving, progressive democracy of ethnic Chinese. And that vision could be an existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party. Beijing expends untold amounts of energy at preserving one-party rule by tracking and cracking down on dissent. And Taiwan's emerging status as one of Asia's leading democracies poses a direct challenge to the authoritarian regime in Beijing. And Taiwan is not alone. Hong Kong, a former British colony, returned to China in 1997 under the principle of one country, two systems. But its democratic ambitions appear to have Beijing hot under the collar. When China announced in 2014 that it would be vetoing candidates in Hong Kong's democratic election for its leader in 2017, a resistance was born. A pro-democracy protests known as the Umbrella Movement sprung up in defiance.
Really divided the protesters because most people here are saying let this traffic go through.
But it was forcefully suppressed and many of its leaders are now on trial. Many in Hong Kong now sense Beijing is breaking its promise of one country, two systems and is instead in the midst of a prolonged meddling in Hong Kong's affairs with an eventual goal of assimilation. But the resolve of pro-independence movements in Taiwan will only be strengthened by the deterioration of democratic ambitions in Hong Kong. And soon, that resolve will be put to the test. Taiwan is about to go to the polls for its midterm elections. And the vote will be a test for the country's independence-leaning government. Also among the issues at stake is a referendum for the name Taiwan to be officially used at the Olympics, instead of the Beijing-approved Chinese Taipei. Now, it may not sound like a big deal, but to anxious minds in Beijing, that move would demonstrate Taiwan asserting its autonomy. But beyond the midterms, this contentious territorial dispute is expected to rear its head up again and again and again. And if recent times are to be any indication of what's to come, Beijing seems determined to maintain control of the narrative and keep both Taiwan and Hong Kong well within its boundaries.
Are you wondering how the people in Taiwan feel about this whole scenario?
Hi, I'm Brian, a host from Taiwan, a place most countries don't care about because everyone wants some of that Chinese money. You might remember us as the country that made all your toys when you were a kid. Now we don't do that anymore because China took all of those jobs. Now our number one business is selling out our own country to China or the US, depending on who's in charge. Now, we all know that international bullying is not good unless you're super rich and your name is China. This is the beautiful flag of Taiwan. The 12 rays of the sun represent the 12 months of the year, and the red background, actually, who cares? We're not allowed to use our flag in international events anyways. That's right. In the Olympics, we can't fly our own flag. We have to use the Olympic flag, kind of like refugees. But of course, we're not saying that the Taiwanese are like refugees, because the United Nations actually cares about refugees. Oh, I wish I could be a refugee. If you're planning on coming over for a visit, you might notice that on most airlines, we're called China Taiwan. That's because as a Taiwanese, we can't call ourselves our own name. Remember Theon Greyjoy? He got his dick cut off and was forced to call himself Reek, a name he didn't want. That's us! We're the international equivalent of Theon Greyjoy. And guess who Ramsay Bolton is? This fat fuck. What about nightlife, you ask? You got it. If you like counting down for New Year's Eve, you'll love counting down our diplomatic allies. That's right, we're losing them steadily because China shoves more money down their cleavage than we do. But we don't like to make fun of our allies because they can help us on the international stage. When China is trying hard to ostracize us, our allies can condemn them. Checkmate, China! Of course, we all feel lonely sometimes. I personally like to stroll along the seashore and let the Chinese Air Force and battleships keep me company.
Wow, for a military patrol in our own territory? That's like a Mexican lawnmower, right?
That's right, Kevin, because China definitely loves to fuck us over. Really, I don't even know if I have STD because China won't let us join the WHA. And if you still want to remain silent when China is bullying us because you want to suck its dick, that's fine. We just hope that when your country can't return its debts, you can get screwed as hard as we currently are. Have fun!
What is the next big thing for our big brother China, which has an insatiable appetite for power and more and more? China has made innovation a top priority in its economic planning through a number of high-profile initiatives, such as Made in China in 2025, a plan announced in 2015 to upgrade and modernize China's manufacturing in 10 key sectors through extensive government assistance in order to make China a major global player in these sectors. China's efforts to expand its economic influence globally is a big concern for a lot of regional and global players, including China's Belt and Road Initiative, to finance and help build infrastructure projects in Asia, Africa, Europe, and elsewhere. Many analysts contend that China could use this project to boost its industries facing overcapacity, such as steel, gain new overseas markets, influence other countries to adopt China's economic model, and expand China's soft power towards many countries that will partake in this project. Hold on a second. Does this sound familiar to you? For me, gaining new overseas markets, influencing other countries to adopt Chinese economic model, and expanding China's soft power does sound like a bit another form of neocolonialism, don't you think? Anyways, let's slow down here a bit and break it down to analyze the situation better. So let's have a look at what does One Belt, One Road initiative actually stand for.
There's a new highway in Pakistan and a new rail terminal in Kazakhstan. A seaport in Sri Lanka recently opened, as well as this bridge in rural Laos. What's interesting is that they're all part of one country's project that spans 3 continents and touches over 60% of the world's population. If you connect the dots, it's not hard to see which country that is. This is China's Belt and Road Initiative, the most ambitious infrastructure project in modern history that's designed to reroute global trade. And it's how China plans to become the world's next superpower.
Kazakhstan.
It's 2013, and Chinese President Xi Jinping is giving a speech in Kazakhstan, where he mentions the ancient Silk Road, a network of trade routes that spread goods, ideas, and culture across Europe, the Middle East, and China as far back as 200 BC. He then says,
We should take an innovative approach and jointly build an economic belt along the Silk Road.
A month later, Xi is in Indonesia.
The two sides should work together to build up a new maritime road in the 21st century.
These two phrases were the first mentions of Xi's legacy project, the multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. They're also the two components of the plan. There's an overland economic belt of 6 corridors that serve as new routes to get goods in and out of China, like this railroad connecting China to London, and these gas pipelines from the Caspian Sea to China, and a high-speed train network in Southeast Asia. Then there's the Maritime Silk Road, a chain of seaports stretching from the South China Sea to Africa that also directs trade to and from China. The BRI also includes oil refineries, industrial parks, power plants, mines, and fiber optic networks, all designed to make it easier for the world to trade with China. So far, over 60 countries have reportedly signed agreements for these projects. And the list is growing because China promotes it as a win-win for everyone. Take, for example, the BRI's flagship project, Pakistan. Like many countries in Central and South Asia, Pakistan has a stagnant economy and a corruption problem. It wasn't a popular place for foreign investment, that is until China came along. In 2001, China offered to build a brand new port in the small fishing town of Gwadar. By 2018, the port, as well as a highway and railway networks, became a $62 billion corridor within the BRI. It's where the economic belt meets the Maritime Silk Road, and it seemed to benefit both countries. Pakistan saw its highest GDP growth in 8 years and forged a tight relationship with a major world power. China, on the other hand, secured a new alternative route for goods, especially oil and gas from the Middle East. Through projects like these, it also found a way to boost its economy. Chinese construction companies that had fewer opportunities within their own country saw a huge boost from BRI contracts. 7 out of the 10 biggest construction firms in the world are now Chinese. What tips the balance in China's favor even more is a requirement that it be involved in building these projects. In Pakistan, for example, Chinese workers have directly built projects like this highway here, and a Chinese firm has worked with locals on a railway here in Serbia. China's involvement is one of its very few demands, and that's set these deals apart so far. See, typically, to get investment from the West, countries have to meet strict ethical standards. But China's offered billions of dollars, mostly in loans, with far fewer conditions. So it's no surprise the BRI has been a big hit with the less democratic countries in the region. China has signed agreements with authoritarian governments, military regimes, and some of the most corrupt countries in the world. It's even affiliated with Afghanistan, Ukraine, Yemen, and Iraq, all currently splintered by conflict. Because of China's willingness to loan money to unreliable countries, many experts have called the BRI a risky plan. Eventually, these countries will have to pay China back, but corruption and conflict make that payback unlikely. A recent report found that many of the countries indebted to China are very vulnerable, including 8 that are at high risk of being unable to pay. So why does China keep lending? Because there's more to the BRI than just economics. In Sri Lanka, China loaned about $1.5 billion for a new deepwater port. It was a key stop on the Maritime Silk Road. By 2017, it was clear Sri Lanka couldn't pay back the loan, so instead they gave China control of the port as part of a 99-year lease. China also controls the strategic port in Pakistan, where it has a 40-year lease. It's pushing for a similar agreement in Myanmar, and it just opened an actual Chinese naval base in Djibouti. These are all signs of what's been called the string of pearls theory. It predicts that China is trying to establish a string of naval bases in the Indian Ocean that will allow it to station ships and guard shipping routes that move through the region. So while China's not getting its money back, it's still achieving some very important strategic goals. China's growing influence challenges the status of the US, which has been the world's lone superpower for the last several decades. But isolation is trending in the US, meaning that they are investing less and therefore losing influence around the world. The BRI is China's way of leveraging power to become a global leader. By building relationships and taking control of global trade, China's well on its way.
Still not sure about what's going on? Let's have a look at a simpler explanation.
If only someone could explain One Belt, One Road in a simple way, like for children.
The belt connects to land, the road moves on the sea. The promise that they hold is joint prosperity.
Okay, I get the belt part. It's a metaphor for how Xi Jinping keeps his pants so high. But a road that moves on the sea? Wait a minute. Is this about those artificial islands in the South China Sea? Are they building moving roads now to connect them all? Anyway, state-run New China TV, please continue.
With our lines and our cables, diplomacy tables, we'll share in a world of prosperity. Oh, the future's coming now. The belt and road is how.
The belt and road is how? As in the Chinese word for good? Oh. Congratulations to Chinese state-run media for really upping their propaganda game. But maybe you're still not clear what One Belt, One Road actually is. Maybe one of the other children's videos by Chinese state-run media can explain.
Once upon a time, several routes led from China through Central Asia to Europe. It was called Silk Road. A few years ago, China's President Xi Jinping proposed making new routes like the old routes, but even bigger.
That's pretty much the gist of it. China wants to be the new world leader, not through actually colonizing the world with military force, which frankly never turns out well. Ask the British. No, China wants to rule with economic force. One Belt, One Road is about building giant infrastructure projects in Asia, Europe, and Africa. Mainly things like roads, rail lines, tunnels, bridges, seaports, and power plants. In theory, this will bring resources and power to China and money and goods to everyone. You know, joint prosperity. China is pledging around $1 trillion with tens of billions spent so far. According to China Caixin magazine, 50 Chinese state-owned enterprises have invested in nearly 1,700 projects since Xi Jinping first announced the initiative in 2013. Those include 60 energy-related projects like gas pipelines from Russia and Kazakhstan to China. They also include high-speed train routes like the $4 billion rail line that will send trains from Ethiopia into Djibouti. In theory, China spending billions of dollars to invest in, the joint prosperity of dozens of nations is a good thing. If countries have real economic need and China helps fulfill them, then China will be doing a great thing. But there are serious concerns that's not how it's going to go down. Let's take Laos, for example. Laos is a poor Southeast Asian country with a GDP of less than $14 billion. A Chinese joint venture is building a $6 billion railway project there. How can Laos afford such a huge investment, one that's projected to lose money for the first 11 years? No problem. Chinese banks will loan them the money. And if they can't pay it back, I guess Laos will just owe China a couple of favors, political favors, like supporting the Chinese Communist Party in the UN, or economic favors, like signing away their mineral rights to China. Or the Chinese Communist Party could just break their kneecaps. And Laos is just one example of how China's skein of geese might turn out to be more like a kettle of vultures. A lot of poor countries are concerned that the Chinese Communist Party wants to use these infrastructure projects to make it easier for Chinese companies to extract their natural resources and get rich at the expense of the locals. I mean, in theory, this whole joint prosperity slogan is supposed to mean a win-win for everyone. At least, that's what the happy multi-ethnic children would have you believe. but a lot of the infrastructure is designed to exploit oil and minerals or move goods, and not to create housing, schools, or access to clean drinking water. And that's especially an issue in poor African countries like Ethiopia and Djibouti. Corrupt local officials might get rich, but the general public, probably not. And there's another problem. China doesn't exactly have a great track record of successful infrastructure projects to begin with. This Oxford Review of Economic Policy paper analyzes 3 decades of Chinese investment data. It says, far from being an engine of economic growth, a typical infrastructure investment has destroyed economic value in China due to poor management of risks. So basically, extensive long-term data shows that the majority of Chinese infrastructure investments actually lose money. So 10 years from now, we might see a lot of busted kneecaps. There are other concerns that affect wealthier regions too, like the European Union. According to this article in The Guardian, the 28 member states of the EU decided not to support Beijing's draft statement about trade issued at the end of this past week's BARF summit. They really have got to work on those acronyms. The problem? Members wanted guarantees that projects would be economically and environmentally sustainable and subject to fair tendering processes. Well, I believe the Chinese leaders have pledged to treat these projects like they're in China's own backyard, so I'm sure they'll be environmentally sustainable. As for fair tendering processes, yeah, you're on your own. Look, I'm not saying it's wrong for China to look out for its own interests. Of course, every country wants to make sure they get an advantage out of working or investing in other countries. But One Belt, One Road is a way that the Communist Party can exploit poorer countries for China's economic and political gain, all disguised under the idea of shared benefits and joint prosperity. It sounds good on paper, or in a song, or a bedtime story, but it's not so clear whether all these swan geese are really going to get off the ground.
So how do you think about One Belt, One Road now? Some countries seem very keen and excited about this huge project and remarkable example of international collaboration, such as a country in Africa, Congo. Here's an official promotion video of 2 countries' friendship inspired by One Belt, One Road projects.
mikolo tosekeleki na mosolo ya mboka Kongo ekoki tofungwani miso lelo tomoni botoba nyonso tosali oya kobongisa Kongo avenir ebongi tosala motoro nyonso ratamona Kongo ya mosolo pembe ya nzoko Kongo ya bwanya asa ya mbila Kongo ya makasi moto ya ngoi.
It looks like people are celebrating the modernization of the country with the help from the Big Brother. Well, someone is offering to build new roads, railways, high-rise buildings in your country, but also promoting the Chinese way of living, Chinese values, and Chinese food. Why not? And this is what they are keen to become.
Yeah. China. 巩固 Let's go！ 美丽的中国，我的故乡，一边是黄河，一边是长江，滔滔江水日夜忙，青山绿水永不忘。中国人民英勇为勤劳善良，可爱的刚果是我的家乡，刚果
国人民坚韧不拔、淳朴刚强。两国国旗高高飘扬，中刚合作扬帆起航。两国青年充满理想，国家重任担在肩上，“一带一路”变人神往，合作成果不断增长，为了国家艰苦奋斗，繁荣富强，迈向小康。撸起袖子加油干，学习当年男女湾。
万浪的花下，听我来唱一唱，唱一呀唱，来到了哪里玩？男女湾好地方，好地呀方，好地方来好风光，好地方来好疯狂，到处是花香，人地是牛羊。
A small but growing number of countries in the developing and post-communist world are looking at China as a model for growth with stability. China has been marketing itself not as a nation state, but as a civilization state, which builds and functions on a different set of values and principles than the West and the other parts of the world. Given a choice between market democracy and liberal values, and market authoritarianism and limits on civil liberties, many developing countries prefer the Chinese model of authoritarian market economy, which comes with new investment in infrastructure, economic growth, stability, and improved living standards, understandably so. As the prestige of the Chinese model grows, even without Chinese efforts to propagate it, other authoritarian governments are encouraged by the idea that authoritarianism is compatible with modernization, and they try to adopt to varying degrees the Chinese method of control of civil society and individual freedoms. Turkey. Arguably, another example which is looking up to the Chinese way of authoritarian market economy is Turkey. As we all know, Turkey is a transcontinental country between Asia and Europe. Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Justice and Development Party, AKP, has been in power since 2001 in Turkey by winning multiple election victories successively for 17 years. Yes, you heard it right. The same man has been in power for 17 years. Erdogan comes from an Islamist background and self-proclaimed himself as a conservative Democrat. He has promoted socially conservative but economically pro-capitalist but not so liberal policies in his administration. Erdogan's government has been accused of democratic backsliding and corruption in later years. Starting with the anti-government protests in 2013, his government imposed growing censorship on the press and the social media, imposing blocks on sites such as YouTube, Twitter, and Wikipedia. Regardless, although turning into an authoritarian country, Turkey is still having its noble integrity to stand up for themselves and fight for what they believed to be modern and free country.
Turkey has condemned China's treatment of its Muslim ethnic Uyghur people as a great cause of shame for humanity and asked it to close down its concentration camps. In a statement on Saturday, Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesman Hami Aksoy said that China had arbitrarily detained more than 1 million Uyghurs. He said the Turkic Muslim population faced pressure and systematic assimilation in Western China. It is no longer a secret that more than 1 million Uyghur Turks who are exposed to arbitrary arrests are subjected to torture and political brainwashing in concentration camps and prisons, Aksoy said. The reintroduction of concentration camps in the 21st century and the systematic assimilation policy of Chinese authorities against the Uyghurs is a great embarrassment for humanity. We invite Chinese authorities to respect fundamental human rights of the Uyghurs and shut down concentration camps. China described the comments as completely unacceptable. They claim the detention camps in Xinjiang are vocational education centers designed to help rid the region of terrorism. Speaking last October, The top Chinese official in Xinjiang, Shourat Zakir, said trainees in the camp were grateful for the opportunity to reflect on their mistakes. China's Xinjiang region is home to around 10 million Uyghurs. The Turkic Muslim group, which makes up around 45% of Xinjiang's population and has long accused Chinese authorities of cultural, religious, and economic discrimination. Practicing Islam is forbidden in some parts of China, with individuals caught praying, fasting, growing a beard, or wearing a hijab, a headscarf worn by many Muslim women, face the threat of arrest. According to the Associated Press news agency, religious schools and Arabic classes have been banned in the Xinjiang province and children barred from participating in Islamic activities. Last month, China passed a new law that seeks to Sinicize Islam within the next 5 years, the latest move by Beijing to rewrite how the religion is practiced. According to the Global Times, China's main English newspaper, the new law seeks to guide Islam to be compatible with socialism. China has embarked on an aggressive Sinicization campaign in recent years, with faith groups that were largely tolerated in the past, seeing their freedoms shrink under Chinese President Xi Jinping, China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong.
Guess how does China respond to it?
He has accused China of operating internment camps in Xinjiang and is taking Western media reports as fact to viciously attack China. This country once again disappointed Chinese people with its willful and shallow behavior. Xinjiang has been forced to set up education and training centers to carry out de-extremization work on some extremists who have committed minor crimes. This is the least costly way to restore stability in Xinjiang. In this way, Xinjiang has avoided the chaos that happened in Chechnya from breaking out and saved a number of Uyghurs who had been brainwashed by extremist thought. Western public opinion is criticizing China out of extreme bias. But Muslim nations have not joined the ranks of Western opinion because they understand China's difficulties in dealing with Xinjiang problem. After Turkey's failed coup in 2016, the Erdogan government carried out what the West described as a mass purge. Many in Chinese society also feel that Erdogan's government had gone too far and sympathized with the opposition. But the Chinese government respects Turkey's internal affairs and Beijing did not intervene. Turkey's statement will not have any effect on China except to reduce the Chinese public's respect for Turkey.
Wow! How can any country endure this kind of humiliation? Turkey must man up, stand up for themselves again.
One of the main challenges Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan is facing right now is the country's economic state. The Turkish lira has lost more than a third of its value since the beginning of the year. Erdogan declared Turkey would be turning to China for collaboration in many areas, most importantly in finance.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has announced that Turkey is issuing Chinese yuan-denominated bonds for the first time and that Turkey is turning towards China for external borrowing.
Economists emphasize Turkey's decision to diversify its sources of financing will make it stronger.
Stability for the Turkish lira will come from cooperation with valuable countries like China. It's impossible for the central bank to do something alone. Resources are needed. If this resource will come from China, then it will come from China. But the important thing is to make use of this resource. It is clear we need wisdom, the ideas and the suggestions of countries like China.
Erdogan also said China, Mexico, Russia and India will be new markets for Turkey's exports. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan recently met with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Africa during the BRICS summit. Smiling and shaking hands, the leaders stressed bilateral cooperation would be increased in the fields of trade, investment, infrastructure, construction, counter-terrorism and security. Turkey has also been taking part in China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Türkiye ile Çin işbirliği yaptığı zaman
When China cooperates with Turkey on the Belt and Road Initiative, it is beneficial for both sides. Turkey will benefit in terms of fulfilling its infrastructure and energy needs, and China will have a strong partner as it aims to expand in this region and will help the project's stability and sustainability.
There are also several Chinese investments in Turkey. China's state-owned shipping company COSCO Pacific owns 65% of Turkey's third largest port.
I believe Turkey and China could also expand their partnerships in Turkey's other ports, in the Mediterranean Sea, in the Aegean Sea and at the Black Sea. And a critical move is not just to combine these ports with the railway projects and extend the lines, but to create a logistical network.
Turkish President Erdogan also announced Turkey was working on an action plan to draw more Chinese tourists to Turkey. Turkey is set to open its first cultural and language center in China. 2018 had been declared Turkish Tourism Year in China. Michal Bardavid, CGTN, Istanbul.
Uyghurs in Turkey have more to fear than spies. After years of offering them a safe haven, Turkey's president has begun making deals with China, with trade now worth $28 billion a year. Uyghurs are afraid Turkey will choose its economy over their welfare. For some, the time has come to move on, yet again.
Next.
A group of Canadian Uyghurs are here trying to help, registering those wanting asylum in Canada.
Organizers here tell us that in the past 3 days, more than 1,500 people have put in applications to leave. It's just another indication of how desperate people are to find a safe refuge.
The longer they stay here in Turkey, the more difficult their situation. Their passports are expiring, and China is refusing to renew them, leaving them in limbo.
Okay, there is no way to get even like temporarily Chinese passport or anything. At the present, he is a stateless.
How common is his story, his example?
People I have interviewed so far, 100%. His case is just a rule. This is not an exception.
Turkey once granted Uyghurs citizenship, but that's become much more difficult.
There is a level of desperation.
Yes, yes. You cannot open bank account, you cannot rent a house. You kind of like, we have been persecuted in China. We have thought that, once in Turkey we will be able to build a new life, but this is not the case.
Abduweli faces the same uncertainty. His passport's expired. Without papers, he's not officially allowed to work.
Oh, wait a second. Did someone just say that they don't know who Uyghur people are and which country they are from? And have no clue what is going on there? Haven't got a clue about how does China treat their own citizens? It's okay, but it's such a long story. I'm afraid I wouldn't have the energy to explain all the detail to you now, when actually we can watch a whole series of videos together about this subject.
China's far western Xinjiang region is one of the most tightly controlled areas in the entire country. It is officially called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region because 45% of its population are Uyghurs, a Muslim minority who identify themselves as culturally and ethnically close to the people of Central Asia. China's ruling Communist Party has governed all of Xinjiang since 1949. And in the decades since, activists say the government has introduced policies that have gradually eroded the Uyghurs' religious, commercial, and cultural activities. Uyghurs remain the dominant ethnicity in Xinjiang, but a large influx of Han Chinese, the country's largest ethnicity, has made Uyghurs the minority in major cities like Urumqi. While Beijing has invested heavily into industry and energy projects, touting them as signs of progress, many Uyghurs say the Han Chinese are taking most of the jobs that are created. That has led to resentment and frustration that has broken out in violence more than once. In one of the worst incidents, nearly 200 people were killed in Urumqi in the summer of 2009. Dozens of others have been killed in bursts of violence in other parts of Xinjiang since. China blames Xinjiang separatists based outside the country for the unrest. It singled out exiled Uyghur leader Rebia Kadir, who has denied inciting violence. Several attacks in other parts of China have also been blamed on Xinjiang separatists that authorities allege have ties with extremist groups like Al-Qaeda. In January 2018, officials said the number of trained jihadist fighters caught trying to re-enter China from overseas rose tenfold from the year before. The Chinese government has put Xinjiang under virtual lockdown. Observers say authorities have set up more than 7,300 police monitoring stations, confiscated the passports of most Uyghurs, and some parts of the region have forbidden parents from giving their newborns Muslim names. In August 2017, all Xinjiang residents were ordered to download and install this mobile app that security experts say scans phones for digital fingerprints of illicit files and informs authorities when it finds them. Human rights groups have also presented evidence of political education camps that have been set up in Xinjiang. They say up to 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities have been sent to the camps where they are subjected to propaganda that promotes the Chinese identity. China denies an arbitrary detention policy and says the people at these vocational centers are guilty of minor offenses and are being taught skills to reintegrate them into society. The full extent of the government's crackdown in Xinjiang is unclear because access is highly restricted. But Chinese officials say all the measures they've taken are to fight extremism, ensure stability, and protect the whole country.
Wow, look at this. It's like a city. Your dad's in there.
In Xinjiang, displays of police might are everywhere. But there's something here they don't want you to see.
Huge fences all around it, look.
Behind these blue steel walls, in a former school, is what China calls a vocational training center. But it looks more like a prison. Nearby, relatives queue up to visit. From above, the grim details can be picked out. Last year, the school had a football pitch. Today, it's covered with what look like accommodation blocks. Watchtowers are visible. On a corner, just outside the camp fence, we stop to speak to a family.
What are you guys doing here?
Some officials try to stop us filming, but another intervenes. Let them speak, she says. I ask who they're visiting. My dad, he replies.
Your dad's in there.
Xinjiang's main Muslim minority are known as the Uyghurs. We find many of their homes locked and deserted. Sinister official notices on the doors say the missing are being looked after. One credible estimate suggests up to 1 million people may now be detained. But the BBC has seen new, detailed satellite analysis of dozens of suspected camps across Xinjiang. Few of them look much like schools. This giant compound is surrounded by a high wall with 16 watchtowers. We try to approach the site by car.
Look at this.
Only to discover that it's being expanded on a massive scale.
It's like a city.
Then the police block our way. If this really is all about education, then why the effort to stop us getting close?
Impressive thing is
the satellite analysts show us a more recent image. It's clear how much the site has grown.
Everything double.
Even more than double. But the team is able to show that this one camp is part of something much bigger by identifying many other similar secure facilities right across Xinjiang.
All this is new.
Plotting their growth over time shows just how fast they're being built.
Satellites see beyond what the human eye can see. As the years pass, we have detected that the number of infrastructures being built increases, and most significantly in the past 2 years.
And prison design experts tell us this could now be one of the biggest detention facilities in the world, holding 11,000 inmates at the very least. China denies it is detaining Muslims in Xinjiang. In response to the allegations, state TV has been showing classrooms of supposedly grateful adults willingly undergoing re-education. Without this, I might have followed religious extremists, this woman says. From a vegetable field to another one of China's new schools in less than 6 months, complete with watchtowers. We try to film one of them, but once again, while trying to get to the truth, we're asked to leave.
This is how China wants the world to see how it treats predominantly Muslim ethnic groups in the western province of Xinjiang. To counter accusations that Beijing is conducting a program of mass detentions and religious persecutions, foreign journalists were shown a classroom of students. All seemed eager to reconsider their past actions and even their past thoughts.
我们的民警通过跟我谈话，你是为了国家法律，然后推荐给我移居那种一所学校，然后我跟家人商量以后，在这申请资源来的。
你是犯了什么罪呢？
我以前多次听了非法将军人员讲的一些言论，然后通过听了他的言论之后，我就在脑海里出现了一些极端思想，然后违反了国家法律。
The authorities call these places vocational education training centres. They're presented as a place where attendees can improve their written Mandarin, learn new skills, or even new dance routines. This site is fenced, but Reuters, which shot these pictures, say there was only minimal security at the 3 centres they visited. That contrasts sharply with this heavily fortified facility. Human rights activists allege this is one of dozens of political re-education camps where up to 1 million people, Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakh, ethnic Kyrgyz and others, have been detained in Xinjiang in recent years. Some former inmates say they were tortured. This ethnic Kazakh woman told RFE-RL she spent 8 months in a camp.
600-700 болып кетті қыздар. Адам көбейіп кеткенде жаңағы палатаға сыйыспай, сөйтіп көптен жаттық. Бір каруатқа 2 қыздан жатып қалдық. Туалеті де бүтін бәрі ішінде. Сол ішінде болғаннан кейін ол жерде кейін ауру көбейіп кетті. Ауырдық бәріміз. Жаңағы 1 рет 2 рет қателік жасап қойсаң, бір қараңғы үй бар. Соған қамақ қояды 24 сағат. Оған біздің жатақтан 2 қыз кірді. Тек сағыз шайнақ қойғаны үшін кірді да. Енді ол жер қараңғы, есік терезесі жоқ. Тек подвалда болады да. Тек отыра алмайсың, жата алмайсың, тікеңнен тік тұрасың.
The detentions have sparked outrage in neighbouring Central Asian countries, with families demanding the return of loved ones at events across the region. China says it's conducting a people's war on terror against Muslim extremists. The visiting journalists were shown a cache of weapons on display in the provincial capital Urumqi, which the authorities say was seized from local insurgents.
让大家更清晰地了解近年来90年代以来，特别是近年以来，
这个暴恐分子在新疆实施的这种罪恶的行径，对新疆人民犯下的这种不可滔天的罪行，从而让大家呢更好的理解新疆自治区这些年来采取的在维护稳定方面采取的一些措施，让大家更好的了解这个背景。
Taiwan-based Uyghur dissident says the tour for foreign journalists presented a false picture of what was going on in Xinjiang.
They're going to put a cosmetic on that to suit their propaganda that this internment camp is actually an education, vocational education camp, that people there are happy. The members, the camp members in there are happy. But let's be focused. Even the organized trip can see that the members in the camps were there against their will.
The presentation of these smiling faces to the media has not stopped the testimonies about mass-scale human rights violations in Xinjiang. Nor will it halt pressure being applied to Beijing to end the alleged abuses in its camps.
The northern hillside of Yingye Township in Yining City, Xinjiang, was originally an open space and also served as a shooting range for militia training. Now, a transformation through education camp was built here. The camp is massive in size, containing 4 building complexes with a floor space area of about 110,000 square meters. The camp can accommodate several thousand people. According to a GPS image published by Shan Zheng, a Chinese student in Canada, a plot of land that was empty in mid-October of 2017 was covered in buildings by August of 2018. In August, our reporter penetrated the Yingye transformation through education camp and photographed its interior constructions. Within the transformation through education camp, a complex of orange buildings lined up side by side holds dormitories for the camp's students. And upon closer inspection of the exteriors of the buildings in the complex, one can see that each building is 4 stories tall and that the windows of each floor are fitted with guard railing, as well as an additional layer of guard netting. The exit areas of each building are fitted with 3 surveillance cameras apiece, which comprehensively monitor the area from the left, right, and center. A slogan is written on the external walls of the buildings which reads, "Heartfelt thanks for the cordial care of the Party Central Committee, with Comrade Xi Jinping as the core." Inside the buildings, the interior constructions are just like the cells of a prison or detention center. Each room has double iron doors, and the outermost iron door also has guard railing and a keypad lock. Each dorm room has its own washroom and is fitted with a surveillance camera. According to a leak from an inside source, up to 15 people can live in each dorm. Surveying has also revealed that each floor holds 28 dorm rooms and 3 classrooms. Various slogans are written on the walls outside of the classrooms, such as, "Make a habit of studying Mandarin," and follow the guidance of Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, and untiringly strive to realize the China dream of a great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Besides, this floor of the building also contains a standalone surveillance room. From the large screen monitor, it is apparent that 360-degree surveillance cameras are installed in every corner of the building, including not only classrooms, dormitories, and corridors, but even washrooms. Every move by the detainees is monitored 24 hours a day. They are totally deprived of freedom and privacy. The entirety of each building is stringently guarded, and in addition to surveillance cameras being installed in every corner, the entrance to the building has been fitted with an iron gate as well. In the corridors, the windows of each room have also been sealed with tight iron bars and wire netting. And even the windows in the room that may be used as the student cafeteria are no exception. It is nearly impossible for the people being held in these buildings to escape. Our reporter also noticed that there are several areas surrounded by chain-link fencing on empty land in front of certain buildings, next to which large quantities of wire netting that hasn't yet been used is stacked in piles. On one side of the fencing, the words "Emergency Asylum" are written. According to an inside source from the public security system, this emergency asylum is most likely an outside walking area for detainees. An outside walking area is a place in the courtyard of a prison, where the prison allows its inmates to go to get some exercise at set times. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP authorities, have been desperately denying the existence of transformation through education camps. But recently, facing the international community's constant condemnation, the CCP authorities have withdrawn their previous statement and attempted to justify their persecution on Uyghurs, claiming that they are vocational training centers. The Yingyar Transformation Through Education Camp has been advertised to the outside world as a vocational training school, though there is no difference between its inner constructions and those of a prison.
是多长时间了？2月，2个月。好，我希望你们在今后的生活当中，无论贫穷与富有，
没有共产党就没有新中国，没有共产党就没有新中国。我说。
No, stop. Think of the children.
Think of the children. Won't somebody please think of the children?
Children, children, future, future. Are you ready for the children? Whoa, whoa, whoa. The future is a-coming, hey, hey, hey. Children, children, future, future.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? What kind of an example are we setting?
For your children.
Children, children, children are the future. Kids!
For your children. For your children. For your children.
Hello everyone. Welcome back to Think of the Children. Is this the future we promise for? So really, how does all of this is affecting your life here in the UK? And do we really need to care? The United Kingdom has a complex political, economic and historical relationship with China, which is a significant trading partner and an increasingly significant source of investment for the country. Especially since the official elevation of the UK-China relations to Golden Era status in 2014 and the result of the 2016 Brexit referendum, the United Kingdom has become more open to the Chinese influence. For years, the United Kingdom was a bit of an outlier in its openness to the Chinese investment and its willingness to grant Chinese firms, even state-owned ones, access to its critical infrastructure. Nonetheless, there is now growing concern in London about China's ability to leverage its growing economic power into political influence and to use its riches to buy, borrow, or steal key Western technologies that sit at the heart of Western economies. But in order to understand the present, we cannot not look back into the history in the first place. Let's trace back to history when Britain first started to be in contact with China. The documentary Britain's Forgotten Army, produced by Channel 4, which released in 2017, is a perfect resource for us to understand the shared history between the two countries. Here is some clips we shall watch together.
John has discovered a mysterious box hidden in a drawer of a family heirloom, and inside it, something that hasn't seen the light of day for a century.
The box of slides had stayed in this sideboard, as far as I know, pretty well since 1918, nearly 100 years. And it was a great surprise to find them. This is my grandfather standing by a large shell.
John has unearthed a historical treasure trove, a unique photographic record of Britain's secret mission to bring Chinese labourers to the Western Front.
This is a large contingent of the Chinese Labour Corps at Weihai, waiting to be embarked on a ship in the harbour.
Weihai was a British-controlled port in Shandong province. During the 19th century, China had suffered a series of humiliating military defeats and been forced to cede territory to Britain, France, Russia, Japan and Germany. Now, China was ready to support the Allies in the hope they would receive a sympathetic hearing in their bid for sovereignty. John's Mandarin-speaking grandfather was handpicked to lead the operation because of his family's distinguished reputation in China.
One doesn't normally credit the British Army with much sensitivity, but I do think in this case that there was a real effort made to try and get people who had some idea about China.
All the Chinese that were recruited had to have their fingerprints taken by Scotland Yard detectives who were sent to China, and then they had individual numbers stamped on a bracelet which they wore on their arm so that they could all be identified, because Chinese names sometimes were quite confusing to the British.
With the promise of £1 a day wages, 10 times as much as a worker could earn fishing or farming, there was no shortage of recruits for this secret Chinese army. The undercover journey from China to Britain took up to 4 months and included being locked in sealed freight trains for 2 weeks across Canada. Every available ship was used, including cargo ships, where hundreds of labourers were crammed onto vessels designed to sleep just a handful of men. Jing's compatriot from Shandong, Kong Xiaodai, was one of the labourers contracted by the British. Dominic has been investigating Kong's military records and has brought Jing to Le Barak military cemetery near Calais to show her what became of him.
Oh, this is him! Kong Xiaodai.
But he's not the only one, because if you look to the 3 others next to him, they have the same date. There was a riot. The Chinese rioted that day. And in order to quell the riots, the British sent a group of guards, and they just shot in the lot.
They were just shot?
Yeah, they were just shot.
The British just shot them?
Yeah. So without court-martial or anything, they just shot to quell the unrest.
So they were killed by their own employers? Oh, God. Oh, God. What an awful way to end your life. You've travelled all the way around the world. You've escaped dying en route because you were treated like a cattle. And you do the worst, shittiest jobs anyone can think of, and you're punished for over the smallest things. You're not even fed properly. And when you really try to stick up for yourself, because you just can't take any more, you are shot in the street like that, like a dog.
No official inquest was ordered into the 4 Chinese who were shot. Their plight only came to light because a Canadian also died in the crossfire, prompting an inquiry into his death.
If it wasn't for a Canadian that was accidentally killed, we wouldn't have known about the fate of these 4. The Canadian was clearly deemed more valuable. And the Canadian was also a labourer. He was in the Army Service Corps.
Oh, he was doing the same thing as these guys?
More or less, yeah, more or less. Yeah.
But he's Canadian.
But he's Canadian. He's white. He's a European.
He's worth way more. He's worth all of these guys times 100. Oh, wow, that is not how I expected the story to end. Faithful until death.
In January 1919, the Allied nations convened at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris to begin peace negotiations to end the First World War. Far from the global power it is today, China was then a fledgling republic, trying to shake off a century of humiliation at the hands of European nations that occupied large areas of the country.
The fact that China was included in the Versailles Peace Conference was a big deal for the Chinese, because for the first time, China would be sitting with the great powers, the allies, Britain, France, the United States, as a kind of an equal. These were big deals. It would be a turning point for China. Now, what they in reality would be wanting to get would be the return of the German concessions in Shandong and all the German privileges to China.
But instead of returning the German territories to China, the Allies handed over control to another colonial power, China's archenemy, Japan.
One of the saddest things about China in the First World War is France and Britain and Russia had signed secret treaties to let Japan take over Shandong, take over the ex-German colonies, keep them in return for providing shipping to help with the war effort. So, I mean, China needn't have bothered to become an ally. China had, in fact, no hope of gaining anything at Versailles because of the secret treaties.
It is not too strong to state that China was betrayed by its allies. Political reason why the Chinese Labour Corps was sent was to give China a voice in the peace negotiations with the ultimate aim at recovering sovereignty. And that humiliation had huge repercussions in China and how the Chinese saw themselves and how the Chinese looked upon the Western powers.
The double cross at Versailles led to huge demonstrations throughout China. The government collapsed, and in the political vacuum that followed, the Chinese Communist Party was formed under Mao Zedong, setting China on a radically different path from the Western democracies that had betrayed her.
It is an absolutely pivotal moment in Chinese history. It's a terribly important moment because it really starts the 20th century for China, and indeed the 21st century. It starts modern China.
As the Chinese delegation walked out of the Versailles negotiations empty-handed, elsewhere in Paris, millions were celebrating the Allied victory by marveling at the pantheon of war heroes depicted on the largest painting ever made.
Now we know what was the motivation behind the formation of the Chinese Communist Party. The upshot is, we have here a frail country in East Asia adopting Marxist ideology from the Western world in order to fight against a democracy which also originates in the West, which they felt betrayed by. It turns out the biggest bully of today were bullied in the past.
Chinese are the world's biggest spenders when it comes to travel. And now major British tour operator Thomas Cook is hoping to get more of that holiday money spent in cash-strapped Europe by setting up a joint venture in China. Anastasia Churkina has more on how Europe's tuning in to the East.
From made in China to taken over by China, the Asian economic giant is becoming a mighty presence in country after country across the European Union. Let's start in Spain. 1 million Chinese tourists are expected to visit the country by the end of the decade. And this hotel in Madrid is one of an increasing number, actively rolling out the welcome mat for them.
In recent years, we have been noticing an influx of Chinese clients. We realize that we have to adapt to their culture and lifestyle. And the sooner this happens, the better.
Chinese TV networks, information in their native language, and familiar food, along with the red-colored walls favored by Chinese tourists, as well as making sure not to assign them rooms with the number 4, which is believed to be bad luck in China.
About 4 years ago, we started noticing an increase in the number of Chinese tourists. Sometimes we have 200 tourists arriving from China in a single day, so there is a lot of work.
In the UK, it's Chinese investors making their presence felt. London's first fully owned Chinese law firm has opened its doors.
The reason why we chose UK as our first location to situate our office is that UK is not only a portal to Europe, but also a financial center in the world.
The goal of the firm is to make life easier for Chinese business people wishing to pump cash into the UK and the rest of Europe, and those are plenty.
Everyone knows that China is now exporting net capital to the world. And we want to help Chinese investors to do the investment in an orderly manner.
For example, a couple of years ago, the China Investment Corporation acquired a stake in Thames Water, the UK's largest water services company, as well as a 10% stake in the company that runs Heathrow Airport, the main air hub into Britain. Recession-plagued Italy is another Chinese favorite, with their investments hunting some trademark companies, such as car manufacturer Fiat and luxury yacht brand Ferretti. Snatching up the tire-making giant Pirelli looks also to be just around the corner. And in France, millions from China have reportedly been pumped into world-renowned vineyards, begging the question if Europe could eventually become, well, Chinese. Anastasia Churkina, RT.
Everything is turning Chinese. As the United Kingdom has become more and more open to Chinese influence, areas of improper interference from China include politics, civil society, and the media. Chinese firms are involved in strategic parts of the British economy, including telecommunications and nuclear power. Arguably, improper interference is very difficult to distinguish from positive and acceptable influence via the means of civil society, public diplomacy, and commerce. Since 2012, the UK governments, under Prime Minister of David Cameron and Theresa May, have progressively toned down criticism of China over human rights and Beijing's obligations towards the United Kingdom to respect the Sino-British Agreement on Hong Kong. While this may be, in part, due to the United Kingdom's relatively weakening position in international relations, these changes have coincided with Chinese efforts to influence British foreign policy. Intervention by China in UK politics in recent years included cyber attacks on the Scottish Parliament and on think tanks specialising in international security issues with connections to government and sending intimidating messages to politicians seen as enemies of China. China has also denied UK politicians, such as members of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee and the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party's Human Rights Commission, Ben Rogers, access to Hong Kong in order to investigate human rights issues there. China has also acquired influence by offering jobs to former politicians, potentially creating dependencies. Former Prime Minister David Cameron is a case in point. Cameron distanced himself from Dalai Lama in 2013 and embraced the golden era of UK-China ties in 2015, whilst still in office, and positioned himself as China's best friend in Europe. Once out of office, Cameron accepted a senior role in the UK-China Fund, a major infrastructure fund connected with China's Belt and Road Initiative.
In 2016, China became the world's second largest investor, with a foreign direct investment volume of $170.1 billion. According to the fourth edition of the Asada report, Chinese Investment Trends in Europe, China is well positioned to replace the United States as the guiding force of globalization. Although the control that it exerts over its domestic market and its public companies abroad diminish its credibility. In 2016, Chinese investment in Europe grew by 31% to reach nearly $41.2 billion, a quarter of the Asian country's investment worldwide. The top destinations for this investment were technology companies, especially in video games and robotics, industry, and the service sector, which included tourism, entertainment, and environmental services. Germany and the United Kingdom were again among the top destinations for Chinese capital. Together they received half of China's total investments in Europe. And Finland found itself in second place thanks to the acquisition of an 84% stake in the video game firm Supercell Oy by a group of investors led by Tencent. As for the economies of Southern Europe, the Asada report notes that the Chinese government's interests were heterogeneous. Major recipients included Spain, which received a record investment volume of nearly $1.9 billion, and Italy, which received another $800 million. In the first half of 2017, Italy became the top destination for Chinese capital, outranking Germany and the United Kingdom. In Spain, meanwhile, Chinese investors announced the biggest operation of the year, the fund Orient Hontai's decision to acquire a stake in Imagina. However, the transactions were smaller and fewer. The second half of the year saw a total of $30 billion in investment, 25% less than in the same period the previous year. This decrease was a consequence of, among other factors, restrictions placed by the government on foreign transactions to combat soaring debt, the overheating of the real estate market on the country's coast, and the likelihood of international arbitration. Another threat that will be faced by Chinese investors in Europe is the tightening of EU legislation. New legislation spearheaded by Germany, France, and Italy will aim to protect European industry from the erosion of its competitive advantage over China.
Academia and civil society. The Chinese government can exercise influence in the United Kingdom through a number of mechanisms. Number 1, remote cyber monitoring. Number 2, the creation of institutions it controls. Number 3, collaborations based on Chinese funding with strings attached. Number 4, close surveillance and control of Chinese nationals in the United Kingdom. And number 5, reporting on or pressuring domestic institutions and individuals in the United Kingdom. The targets of these activities can be the students, clients, and the wider public. Chinese scholars and students in the United Kingdom, as of March 2018, some 1,700,000, registered with the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, the CSSA UK, which organizes political education events and is supposed to monitor its members in accordance with its patriotic mission. Reportedly, students at some universities in the United Kingdom have also established Chinese Communist Party cells. The use of the CSSA UK to monitor dissent among Chinese students in the United Kingdom is a direct violation of the principles of the United Kingdom's democracy and arguably sovereignty.
I came to China thinking I was going to be completely alone, completely lost, not be able to speak to anyone.
I didn't know much about China. I'd read that it was developing faster than anywhere else.
China's really energetic. It really pulls you out of your comfort zone.
It's been a bit of a culture shock. It was a bit scary at first. I couldn't read the signs, I couldn't talk to people.
I heard about Generation UK in my final year at university, and it just appealed to me. Living in the country, studying a new language.
Your tuition's covered, your books are covered, your accommodation's covered.
I was really excited about the idea of doing this programme. I really wanted to live abroad, wanted to experience it for myself.
Once you get over the initial shock of being in China, then everything changes.
We try to use the vocab that we just learned on the day, and a Chinese person understands what we're saying. It feels good.
I think the locals are pretty friendly.
Everyone's willing to try to communicate even when you have very little Chinese.
你怎么样呢？很饿。那我们等一下就去吃饭吗？
We're such a big and sort of tight-knit group. We'll go to lunch together. I definitely have made friends here. We've bonded. It's been a fun experience.
I think the more people who come out here at Generation UK and learn Chinese, the better. I'm getting by a lot better than I expected to. Being able to order food, and we've been doing a lot of pointing.
Have you done much sightseeing?
Yeah, the other weekend we went to Beijing. It's been so good.
I'm very lucky to be here. I think it's the start of a relationship with China. I don't think you can probably understand the culture until you learn the language and speak to people and live here.
Not even to be cliche, but like I feel like it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I think it's just also made me more open to different cultures.
It breaks down the stereotypes that each country has about each other.
If you want some excitement in your life, then this is the best thing to do.
I hope to work here. This is a place thriving with technology businesses, huge numbers of people going into the technology industry.
There's too many opportunities here. If you are invested in yourself, I'm definitely going to consider something like this.
It's given me confidence and given me language skills. It's sort of proved that you can do anything.
The increased role of China Scholarship Council, a PRC-funded grant provider, is of great concern, as it clearly would not approve projects that might anger China's government. UK-based publishing in China gives rise to concerns about censorship, as in the case of Cambridge University Press temporarily censoring the online version of its journal China Quarterly in China to accommodate government censorship requests. China's treatment of UK-funded educational institutions in China is also of concern in Britain. In June 2018, the University of Nottingham's campus in Ningbo removed its associate provost, Stephen Morgan, after he wrote an online piece criticizing the results of China's 19th Party Congress. Nottingham has previously given the appearance of buckling to Chinese pressures. In 2016, Nottingham abruptly shut its School of Contemporary Chinese Studies just as students were preparing for exams. The action led to the departure of its director, Steve Cheng, a Chinese scholar known for his integrity and independence from Beijing. Sources close to the incident said that PRC pressure on the university played a direct role in the closure of the institute. Chang is now the director of China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London.
Our cover this week focuses on China's investment in Europe, which over the past few years has increased hugely, into everything from industrial companies to airports and infrastructure and to football clubs and media. Much of this is for profit, it's private and it's harmless, but sometimes it's used to buy political influence. For example, Greece and Hungary have worked together to stop Europe from condemning an international tribunal's finding against China in its plans in the South China Sea. China, like any rising economy, wants to invest money abroad. So it's bought stakes in Heathrow and other airports, and in industrial companies like PSA, which makes Citroën and Peugeot cars. Some China boosters think that it makes a good ally in areas such as climate change, where China's President Xi Jinping is standing with Europe, and America's President Donald Trump isn't. But others worry that China may be driving Europe apart from America, because it exploits its links with certain countries to make foreign policy hard in areas such as human rights. We argue that actually both extremes are wrong, both the naive extreme and the hostile extreme. Instead, Europe needs to find something of a middle path. It should resist Chinese protectionism, not mimic it, but remain open, because openness is a strength. But at the same time, it needs to be watchful over Chinese investments to make sure that they do not threaten national security. We also need transparency to see when China is giving money to political parties, to departments in universities, to media or think tanks. And America has a role in this too. At the moment, under President Donald Trump, it tends to look at Europe as a free rider that's sponging off American power. In fact, Europe is a useful and vital ally in areas such as trade, intellectual property, and security. China sometimes has a policy of divide and rule, but if Europe speaks as one, then it can stand up to China for decades to come. A prosperous, united Europe can make the world more stable. A divided, weakened Europe spells trouble.
So, is this the future we promised for our children?
This exploration was made possible by CuriosityStream. The year is 2084. A Chinese citizen with an authentic Chinese name, Winston Smith, has decided to venture from his apartment to a seedier part of the city. But he isn't looking for a typical dark alley product or service. No, he's purchasing a forbidden blank paper book, a journal to write down his true thoughts on his life and on the party. He's going to commit thought crime against the state on the privacy of a page. Many of you may have recognized this as a reference to George Orwell's 1984, when the main character Winston Smith goes and buys a book to write in and begins his journey of questioning society, away from the spying telescreens of the state, away from the stare of Big Brother. Fortunately for that Winston Smith in 1984, he doesn't live in a world of digital surveillance. And unfortunately for our Winston Smith, in the year 2084, as soon as he searched for blank books on China's largest shopping site, Alibaba, the system flagged him. The same happened when he searched China's largest search engine, Baidu, for nearby bookstores. His phone tracked his GPS movements on his way to the store, and the state made note of the bank transaction when he finally purchased the book. So he's immediately arrested and taken to prison room 101 for re-education. The point is that even George Orwell only imagined a world where your TV spied on you, not our world of all-encompassing digital surveillance. Okay, so that was an over-exaggerated example. Let's look at something that actually happens today. You're in China and you've been working without a day off for the past few months and decide you want to take a vacation. You go to an airline's website, enter your personal and financial details, you've been approved a few days off work, your credit card is paid off, and you're looking forward to visiting friends in another city. But when you hit the purchase button, the online system rejects you, referring to the Supreme Court as the reason why you are unable to purchase a ticket. Evidently, you're blacklisted. Now, this scenario has actually happened in China. 23 million people have been barred from purchasing domestic flights due to their low social credit scores, according to government statistics. Now, what is social credit? What distinguishes social credit from, say, just a credit score like we're accustomed to in the West? In the West, a credit score at its most basic is a number representing how worthy you are of a loan, how much debt you can take on and pay off. It's financial. Social credit includes the financial stuff, but also much more than that. Imagine if your credit score was also affected by the people you chose to associate with, your political affiliation, how many kids you had, how many hours a day you gamed or browsed social media, your volunteer work or lack thereof, your faith, all your spending habits, all your day-to-day behaviors, amalgamated into a single number that not just some company can see, not just the government can see, but all your friends and family, all your nosy neighbors. Imagine the pressure and the consequences something like that could have. That's what we're going to explore today, China's infant yet developing social credit system. The primary purpose of the social credit system is not to punish those who have committed crimes. It is to alter the way that individuals think so they would never even consider committing a crime in the first place. Winston, we are not interested in those stupid crimes you have committed. The party is not interested in the overt act. The thought is all we care about. We do not merely destroy our enemies. We change them.
This episode of Black Mirror scared us all to death by taking social media too far.
I see there's one standby seat on another plane leaving tonight. That's reserved for members of our Prime Flight program. You gotta be a 4.2 or over to qualify.
Oh, I'm a 4.2. People are scored out of 5 by everyone they interact with, and their public rating determines where they can live, who they can date, and how they travel.
No! But you invited me. You've seen the guest list. They are all like 4.5 or above. They are going to freak at a 2.6.
But this is just fantasy, right? Not in China. The government is building a social credit system to rate the trustworthiness of 1.4 billion people. There are plans to roll out the system by 2020, but it's already happening in Suzhou City. So, how does it work? Every citizen starts with 100 points linked to their ID card or social media. If you do something good, like volunteer at a charity, recycle trash, donate blood, or send positive energy messages on social media about the country, your score goes up. If you do something bad, like jaywalk, cancel a reservation, leave a dishonest review, or you are even friends with someone with a low rating on social media, your score drops.
In order to restore calm, I'm invoking my authority as airport security to dock you 1 full ranking point as a punitive measure. This is a temporary measure.
High-scoring citizens may get free gym memberships, cheaper public transport, and shorter wait times in hospitals. Low-scoring citizens may have travel restrictions, slower internet speeds, and restricted access to restaurants. Is this Black Mirror nightmare becoming a reality in China?
Improving lives, increasing connectivity across the world. That's the great promise offered by data-driven technology.
Stop killing our children! Stop killing our children!
But in China, it also promises greater state control and abuse of power.
Stop killing innocent people! Stop killing innocent people!
This is the next groundbreaking development in data-driven technology: facial recognition. And in China, you can already withdraw cash, check in at airports, and pay for goods using just your face. The country is the world's leader in the use of this emerging technology. And China's many artificial intelligence startups are determined to keep it that way in the future. Companies like Yitu.
We are pioneering artificial intelligence research and innovation in the hope of creating a safer, faster, and healthier world.
第一次发现，参加展会可以不必排队。
Yitu is creating the building blocks for a smart city of the future, where facial recognition is part of everyday life. This could even extend to detecting what people are thinking.
人工智能
Facial recognition, they can read people's emotions, and we are actually now working on these innovative demonstrations and technology.
But the Chinese government has plans to use this new biometric technology to cement its authoritarian rule. The country has ambitious plans to develop a vast national surveillance system based on facial recognition. It'll be used to monitor its 1.4 billion citizens in unprecedented ways, with the capability of tracking everything from their emotions to their sexuality. The primary means will be a vast network of CCTV cameras. 170 million are already in place, and an estimated 400 million new ones will be installed over the next 3 years. The authorities insist this program will allow them to improve security for citizens. And if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But not everyone is convinced.
这个摄像头现在已经是到处等于是无处不在了。
Hong Shenquai is a former magazine editor who was ousted by the government. He feels like he's under constant surveillance.
我最担心的是我个人的所有的行动行为，我都会被监控到，这是非常可怕的一个事情。
Already the authorities are using facial recognition to name and shame citizens, even for minor offences like jaywalking. In Beijing, they're using the technology to prevent people stealing rolls of loo paper from public toilets. And across China, police officers are now trialling sunglasses and body cameras loaded with facial and gesture recognition technology. It's helping them to identify wanted suspects in real time. What worries some people here is that as the technology develops, so too does the capacity for it to be abused.
那么所有的人在这个生活当中都处在严密的监控之下你不能做任何政府不喜欢的事情如果是这样子的话，我个人认为就相当于进入一个极权主义的一个状态，这是一个很恐怖的状态。
Some of those most at risk in this hyper-surveillance future are the ethnic minorities in China. In Xinjiang province, the Chinese government is wary of the separatist threat posed by the Muslim Uyghur population. According to local NGOs, an estimated 1 million Uyghurs are being detained indefinitely in secretive internment camps where some are being subject to abuse. It's been called the largest mass incarceration of a minority population in the world today. The authorities are using facial recognition cameras to scan people's faces before they enter markets. The system alerts authorities if targeted individuals stray 300 metres beyond their home. In the future, the government plans to aggregate even more data and build a predictive policing programme that imposes even tighter controls here. Without checks and balances, China will keep finding new ways to violate the human rights of its citizens. What's already happening in Xinjiang is a warning the rest of the world must heed.
Psychologist Patrick Mercer would like to talk about the topic of bullying with us now.
Okay, well, my name is Patrick Mercer and I've been working in mental health probably since 1991 as a student, primarily as a psychiatric nurse, and I predominantly work with patients in secondary mental health care with depression, anxiety, emotional unstable personality disorder and bipolar disorder. That's primarily what I do. Well, there's certainly a link between a child who is experiencing feelings of being out of control and trying to regain some kind of control. And we know that sometimes that's about either dominating or influencing or discriminating. And, you know, I think that can take many forms, but I think there's a definitive link, and I think we know that if a child is bullying another child or children, that there's a link that they may be being bullied themselves. And I think we know that there are sort of trigger factors amongst that, which is maybe children that are experiencing parents that are separating or divorcing. We know that sometimes academically, if they're under pressure, so say when there are exams and stuff like that, that also can activate stuff. And I think, you know, I think that bullying is complex and it's also diverse and it takes many different forms. And I think that ultimately it's discrimination. And I think there are some similarities. I think it's not the same as suicide, because of course suicide is very final. But in the same way, I think the impact of bullying is incredibly difficult to measure, in the same way that, you know, that suicide and the impact that has on families and individuals is also incredibly difficult to measure the impact of that on the individual, on the people around the individuals, and how that then maybe shapes the way that person goes on in life. Okay, so the impact of bullying for the victim is depression, anxiety, potentially suicidal thoughts, mental health problems. The impact on the bully can be, it's difficult to say, but my experience is remorse, guilt, you know, profound recurrent feelings of guilt, actually, is what I've experienced. And I think, you know, bullying is a wide set moment. I mean, are you a bully if you laugh along with the bully? Are you a bully if you don't do anything? Are you a bully if you're in some way complicit with the moment? I mean, like, if a little kid came to me and said, you know, oh, somebody's bullying somebody, what do I do? I mean, besides the idea that you might say, find an adult that you know, that you trust, that you want to talk to, it would be, don't engage with it. Don't laugh along with the bullies. Don't engage with the behavior, and go to the person that's being bullied and check if they're okay, and say to them, it's not your fault if you're being bullied. If you're being, my main message about anything, if you're a victim, and particularly if you're a child, is to make sure that kid knows that being bullied is not your fault. The person that's bullying you is at fault. You haven't done anything wrong. I think that's a huge thing that needs to be conveyed to any little kid, or any adult actually, that's being bullied. It's not your fault. There's a correlation with going on to bully, but that's what research has really looked at. Research hasn't looked at the people that were bullied that didn't bully. Research doesn't seem to be interested in that group of people. Research seems to be interested in the people that got bullied and bullied other people. I think research needs to focus on the people that were bullied and didn't bully, and why didn't they bully, and what's that about? That's a piece of research that people need to fucking put some time and money into. A victim culture society where they're interested in victims. Unfortunately. So how do we manage the implications of bullying? Okay, well, number one, we need to identify bullying so people know what it is. So, you know, I'm pretty sure kids get bullied sometimes and they don't even know what the fuck is happening. They don't even know that they're being bullied. They just know that they're having this adversity and they're being discriminated against. and they're experiencing pain. So I think the first thing is to identify bullying, to make sure kids know what it is and what is happening so that they can say, I'm being bullied, so that they can identify it and they can say it. So I think that's the number one thing. I think the second thing is about education, and it's about what you do if you're being bullied. Whether that's talking to an adult or your parents or who it is. So there's identification, and then there's communication, and then there's intervention. So, intervention it's counseling, it's education, it's, if you're being bullied, it's about saying you're being bullied, this is wrong, it's not your fault, these are the things you can do. And for the bully, it's saying your behavior is unacceptable, this is not acceptable, the impact of your behavior on somebody is incredibly damaging, what's happening with you, what can we do to support you, how can we make it different for you that you don't have these feelings where you need to perpetrate meanness on somebody else to manage what the fuck is happening for you. It's a three-parter, I think. Does that make sense? That's the way I see it. It's complex. I mean, I've simplified it. It's way more complicated in the way I've just explained it. But, if you're going to deal with something, you've got to do some compartmentalization in order to tackle it. You've got to go, A, B, C. Three-pronged approach. I'm a big believer in the three-pronged approach because it gives people a pathway. Identify it, talk about it, treat it. What do we do about bullies? Then we have to define where they're at and who they are and what's their standing in society. So you would do different things with an 8-year-old child. I mean, my view is if you have an 8-year-old child that's bullying another child, you need to take them out of the situation where they're bullying somebody and you need to give them an intervention. And that intervention is, as I said before, identifying what they're doing, getting them to talk about what they're doing, and then having some kind of, I suppose it's some kind of treatment, which inevitably we'll be talking about it, we'll be counselling, we'll be trying to find out what's going on for that little kid that makes them need to control and make other kids feel shitty about themselves. And that's always going to be about something that's happening for that bully, for that little kid. And I say little kid because I know a bully is a perpetrator and I know a bully is causing pain for other children, but I'm pretty sure some shit's going on for that little kid. And I think you need to give that kid time, and I think you need to mine what's going on for that kid. You need to find out what's going on at home, or what's going on wherever it's going on, that clearly is damaging that child and making that child feel that they need to then be mean to another child to manage what's internally happening for them. Now, if they're 35 years old and they're in a job, this is where policy comes involved. There's policy, there's, you're not allowed to shout at people, you're not allowed to hit people. I think, the law comes involved in that, and that's boundaries. I mean, I do understand that people are damaged and people act out on their feelings, but I also think there are boundaries. I might be depressed, I might be anxious, I might be paranoid, but that doesn't give you the right to hit somebody. That doesn't give you the right to abuse someone, and I think if you have a mental illness, that shouldn't shield you from the arm of the law and the basic structure of how we operate as a society. So you're not allowed to do certain things. And I think those things should go down the usual legal and, routes, i.e., if you're being mean to somebody at work, you can be disciplined, you can be suspended. Those routes we should follow those routes because they are the boundaries of how we operate with each other. So I think it's different. It doesn't mean that 35-year-old shouldn't have counselling or anything, but that 35-year-old is a fucking adult. And they need to own and pay the price of their behaviour, whatever that might be. And I would always hope that part of the price of paying for it is having some supportive intervention. whether that's counselling or therapy or whatever it is. Breed bullying for sure. We know this, don't we? I mean, that's part of what we've spoken about this evening. In the same way that violence breeds violence, I'm pretty sure we know that there are correlations between bullying and bullying. That doesn't mean to say, and as I've said to you before, I think there should be much more research done on people that have been bullied that don't bully. And what is it about those people that stop them from bullying? That's a really interesting research study that is neglected completely. Why don't they bully? What's going on that they don't bully, or they become an activist, or they become an advocate? Let's look at why that is. That's really important.
Prepare for ourselves. The future is not far away from us. It's an honor to spend some time together with you. My name is Azer Bülbül. Umarım Çin ile iyi dostluklar kurarız. Hoşçakalın.
This is a YouTube video from a future. Not the future, just a future.
From January, every citizen of England and Wales will have a new social credit score. Government and private companies may use your social credit score to make decisions about you. For example, your score could affect the deposit you're asked to pay when renting a home. It could also give you discounts when you're shopping, put you in the priority queue for a new passport, or help you access some healthcare services more quickly. Your social credit score is based on information that the government already knows: the electoral roll, tax payments, criminal records, property ownership, and travel history. If you want to increase your score, you can choose to share more personal information securely with our certified partner companies. Information like your credit card purchases, communications and health information from your phone, energy use data from your smart meter, and your viewing and listening history from streaming companies. That information helps our carefully selected machine learning systems trust you, your friends, and your family. Plus, you can get fun tips on how to increase your score on the Social Credit app. Your social credit score is also affected by the scores of the people you live, work, and spend time with. Everyone's score is public by default. You can check it on the Social Credit app so you can make informed decisions about your life. You can hide your score, but in some cases this may cause it to drop. Some things like disruptive actions, hiding your data trail, or making decisions that harm others could lower your score over time. If this happens, you may find it harder to access certain government and private services. So if you have an old housemate, friend, or relative that you don't spend time with anymore, you may want to file a formal notice of disassociation on the Social Credit app. If you're a dual citizen of Scotland or any other European Union nation, then privacy laws mean we can't give you a social credit score. Because of that, your access to some government and private services may be limited. If you're a citizen of Google, Facebook, or another corporation, please refer to their support pages for advice. Social Credit Scores from the Department for Community and Culture, helping us to help you.